The Supreme Court today handing down a win for Donald Trump in his federal insurrection case, a consequential decision that will affect presidential power for years to come, ruling that Trump has immunity for some of his official conduct as president, but not for private, unofficial acts. Here's how that played out.
The High Court has just issued one of its most consequential rulings in recent decades.
The president has absolute immunity for core constitutional powers, however, not for unofficial acts.
5-alarm fire. Trump's Supreme Court has decreed him a king.
How the justices' rule could well define the parameters of power of the American presidency.
There's really nobody who could claim that our founders wanted a president to have this kind of power.
So the justices split along party lines. Chief Justice John Roberts writing the majority opinion, ruling that a president is, quote, absolutely immune from criminal prosecution for conduct within his exclusive sphere of constitutional authority. But noting, quote, the president is not above the law, but the president may not be prosecuted for exercising his core constitutional powers. So technically, Jack Smith's case against Trump can proceed, but it will be significantly altered, and it is now up to Judge Tanya Chutkan to make the initial determination, but not the final decision, for what exactly the conduct Trump can be prosecuted for. The three liberal justices dissenting, Justice Sonia Sotomayor slamming Roberts' opinion, saying it, quote, makes a mockery of the principle that no man is above the law. Closing with these chilling words, with fear for our democracy, I dissent. This ruling affecting not only Trump, but all future presidents, calling into doubt our system's legal guardrails and issuing unprecedented power to the highest office in the country. Joining me now is Neal Katyal, former acting Solicitor General for the Obama administration and MSNBC legal contributor, and Melissa Murray, NYU law professor and MSNBC legal analyst. My thanks to both of you for joining me this evening. Neal, I'd like to start with you and get your top lines. I know that you were on air when this decision came out earlier this morning, and I want to get your thoughts now that you've had some more time to digest it.
Yeah, no, I think, Katie, the guardrails are off. Our constitutional guardrails now are almost non-existent when it comes to a big zone of presidential conduct. So it's a big win for Donald Trump. It was a big win even before the decision was released because the court delayed it for months and months so that Trump couldn't be tried before the November election, no matter what they said today. But what they said today is a real change in the law, a change in the rules. The traditional posture of the United States, what we fought a revolution on, is no person is above the law. That is now not true. To be sure, they have this exception for unofficial acts, but it looks like an itty-bitty exception, and we know that because the Supreme Court in the majority opinion today went so far as to say that the accusations against Donald Trump for pressuring the Justice Department to insinuate that the November 2020 election was false and to call into question that 2020 election, that was an official act. If that's an official act, boy, presidents are going to have a lot of latitude as to what an official act is. This is not the Constitution as you and I have ever known it.
You know, Melissa, this idea that there's official acts and unofficial acts, that's nothing new per se. In the civil context, we saw that in the Blasingame decision that came out, Blasingame versus Trump. But I wanted to ask you, because the core constitutional powers of the president as an executive having immunity, that's nothing new. And the idea that unofficial acts having no immunity, that's nothing new. But do you agree that the constitutional guardrails are off, as Neal says, and now we have a more expansive reading of what they're calling presumptive immunity for the president of the United States?
I agree entirely, Katie, with what Neal said. And, I'd put a finer point on it. We had already said that this court, through its delay, had effectively given Donald Trump immunity in the January 6th case. I think what this decision does is immunize Donald Trump from anything he might do were he to be elected in November of 2024. My dog is very exercised
angry
about all of this. Mm-hmm. The question of what happens in that outer perimeter, that's a really big question. That's a wide swath of activity. The court speaks of things that are conclusive and preclusive from the Constitution. Those seem settled. And then, of course, there is the question of the private acts. Those are off the table. But there's a wide range of conduct in the middle that there is a presumption of immunity for, and the government has to rebut that presumption, which is a very high bar to clear. More importantly, any acts that are precluded from that are immunized can't be used as evidence to establish the fact or intent or knowledge of acts that are subject to prosecution. So that, again, also gives anyone in this presidential posture the opportunity to do a wide range of conduct, and even the stuff that can be prosecuted will be harder to establish.
So we're going to get to that evidentiary issue in a minute, but we do have some breaking news tonight. The White House announcing just now that President Biden will comment on the Supreme Court ruling later tonight. Those comments are expected to occur at 7:45 p.m. Eastern. Just wanted to let everybody know. Neil, I'm going to go back to you. What do you expect to hear from President Biden in his remarks later?
So first of all, I just want to say, Melissa, I agree with everything Melissa said, and she's far more eloquent than I am, even with the barking dog in the background. With respect to what the president might say, I think it's very tough. This is a pending criminal case, so he can't say a lot without opening up certain accusations about pretrial publicity and the like. So I expect it to be focused just on this one constitutional principle about people being above the law or not, and not to get into more than that, because I think it's very difficult for a sitting president to do that, at least someone who cares about the rule of law. I mean, and Biden, I think has been cautious in the past. But what today's decision would allow him to do, it would allow him to say anything he wants against Donald Trump. It would allow him potentially to even go and order an assassination of Donald Trump, call it an official act, say he's protecting our democracy and preventing the United States from sliding into tyranny, saying that's his first duty as a president. And, that will be, according to the majority, something he can't be prosecuted for. This is the Constitution in an upside down world. It can't possibly, I suspect this decision will not stand the test of time. It is an entirely partisan decision at a time when the court, traditionally in cases like this doesn't act that way. Here you have 6 justices appointed by Republicans siding with the Republican presumptive nominee for the presidency, Donald Trump, 3 Democratic appointed justices disagreeing with that. Normally, when the court acts in cases like this, think about Nixon, the Nixon tapes case, Nixon versus United States in 1974, you have unanimity or near unanimity to the point where the justices that Nixon appointed to the Supreme Court rejected his preposterous claims about executive privilege, which were a mere shadow of the absolute immunity that Trump has won today.
Melissa, I want to stay a little bit on this idea of the separation of powers, because Justice Sotomayor in her dissent remarks that Congress is the branch of our government that's closest to the people. And now they've been sidelined. So Congress that enacts laws, Congress that is there to make sure that the laws are created that we all follow as Americans. Congress has now been sidelined for the judgment of a judge or the judgment of the court to be able to decide specifically for the president, because that's the carve out now, right? The president himself now has a different standard by which his conduct is going to be reviewed, and that has nothing to do with what Congress promulgates as a law.
There's a great deal of hypocrisy here that the dissents called out. We just saw on Friday that this court concluded that unless Congress has specifically authorized an administrative agency to act, the executive cannot act through that agency to regulate industry, whether it's for particulate matter or clean air or whatever. The executive would be acting like a king if it did not act specifically with regard to what Congress had authorized. But here today, we learned that Congress is of no moment, and the court can essentially vest the president with all of the trappings of a monarch. And again, I think you cannot read this decision today without thinking about what came before, and again, how inconsistent it is. Neil made a great point about this being a 6-3 decision. I think most of us imagine that no matter how difficult it would be, this was likely to be a unanimous decision, even if it was very, very narrow. There might be concurrences, there might be dissents, but on cases like this, Chief Justice John Roberts would be striving for unanimity. There's nothing resembling unanimity here. We had lots of different opinions, but we still had that 6-3 fracture along traditional ideological lines. Very surprising.
And speaking of the dissents, Neil, those 3 justices dissented from this decision: Sotomayor, Jackson, and Kagan. Justice Sonia Sotomayor writing, quote, "The president is now a king above the law, naming all of the scary ways that this could go wrong. You mentioned it briefly, Neil. The president, quote, for example, she says, orders the Navy's SEAL Team 6 to assassinate a political rival, immune. Organizes a military coup to hold on to power. Sounds like 1/6 a little bit there. Immune. Takes a bribe in exchange for a pardon. Immune, 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 immune. She also made this point during oral arguments in April. Take a listen.
If the president decides that his rival is a corrupt person and he orders the military or orders someone to assassinate him, is that within his official acts that for which he can get immunity?
It would depend on the hypothetical, but we can see that could well be an official act.
Okay, so John Sauer there, Trump's attorney, saying that that would be an official act, a sentiment then the majority of the court agreeing with today. Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson noting how far this could go in her own dissent, saying, quote, the decision here is whether the president has the option to remove the attorney general by, say, poisoning him to death. I mean, Neil, you kind of said it tongue in cheek, and yet we all were stunned when Sauer made that, kind of stood by that proposition, right, in oral arguments. And yet now the majority saying that if the president says it falls within the purview of his official acts, does he now legally and officially say I can commit murder?
It's unfathomable that the Supreme Court, which has been such an august body, I think back to Chief Justice John Marshall, or think about Justice Thurgood Marshall, people like that are issuing a decision like this that allows for such things, calling them official acts. And that's why I think you saw Justice Sotomayor on the very next page, right after the part you showed, her very last lines are, with fear for our democracy, I dissent.
Today, on a different bid for accountability, Steve Bannon reporting to federal prison in Connecticut for defying a January 6th committee subpoena. He's sentenced to 4 months, meaning Bannon will get out just days before the November 5th election. Bannon is the second Trump ally convicted for criminal contempt of Congress, along with Peter Navarro. Bannon recently spoke to NBC's Vaughn Hilliard, vowing retaliation.
In his Justice Department to do what they should do, to start investigations of how the Justice Department weaponized the legal system against the MAGA movement and President Trump and his followers. There's going to be plenty of time for that.
Joining me now is Josh Green, national correspondent with Bloomberg and the author of Devil's Bargain, Steve Bannon, Donald Trump, and the storming of the presidency. Josh, it's good to have you here. As we speak, you and I, Steve Bannon is literally, finally, behind bars. Your reaction?
Yeah. You know, my first reaction is it sort of makes the book's title, Devil's Bargain, feel even more poignant. What I wrote about back then was sort of how this partnership had come together. But I say in the book that most of Donald Trump's business partners end up unhappy. And here Steve Bannon is headed off to federal prison. But that being said, he's, as he is prone to do, turned it into a media circus. He's using it, I think, to try and amplify and enhance his brand. And, every indication he's given publicly is that this is a great thing and sort of furthers his story, as we heard in that clip, that the Biden Justice Department is somehow persecuting Trump-friendly Republicans.
Yeah, and so, Josh, we hear Bannon's vow several times, including right then with Vaughn Hilliard, that the retaliation is the plan. I mean, plain as day, right? They don't try to hide it. And yet, your thoughts now, considering what the Supreme Court just ruled today in terms of this kind of cloak of official acts being able to be used to provide immunity. So if retaliation is the name of the game, it sounds like the Supreme Court just said, Steve Bannon, Donald Trump, here you go.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, look, usually when Bannon says these kind of things, he's looking to provoke a reaction. He's looking to get media attention. I'm pretty sure that was the case here. Certainly, Trump would have more leeway to retaliate if that's what he decides he wants to do if he gets elected. But I do think for Bannon, like the fact that he's going off to jail is sort of not the way he would write the script himself if he could. But the fact that it's only a 4-month sentence, it could have been longer. I was talking to an ally of his before the sentencing who said, listen, if the sentence is less than 6 months, what I expect is for Bannon to sort of treat himself as if he were Nelson Mandela, a political prisoner. And sure enough, that's what we saw on the steps of the prison today as he was going in, putting himself into this narrative of Trump MAGA world persecution, which I think he believes will enhance his brand, will enhance the image of him as loyal foot soldier to Trump. And ultimately redound to his benefit, at least in a kind of media MAGA world sense.
And then there's this idea, Steve Bannon telling Vaughn Hilliard that Donald Trump is a moderate, using the phrase moderate, and when it comes to MAGA. And yet, to the point that you just made, Peter Navarro, Steve Bannon, some of the 1-6 riders, right? They're the only ones that are doing jail time for a moderate Donald Trump.
Well, I think when you look at what's going on here, Bannon taking pride in the fact that he'd been sentenced to prison, it's almost as if prison time has become a new badge of honor or a sort of mark of loyalty to true fealty to Donald Trump. Navarro had said he doesn't want to be pardoned. He doesn't want to be let out early. Bannon is referring to himself as a political prisoner. I think, as these things become more extreme, as some of these MAGA followers become, ever more extreme in what they're doing, this is just another marker of how far out of the norm things have skewed. That somebody who was his campaign director, who was a chief White House strategist, is now heading into a federal prison.
Hey there, MSNBC fans. I'm Luke Russert, and be sure to join me, Rachel Maddow, Jen Psaki, Lawrence O'Donnell, Steve Kornacki, Joy Reid, and many more September 7th in Brooklyn, MSNBC Live Democracy 2024. Click on the link for ticket information. We will see you there.